At 10:41 a.m. on July 19th, 1944, the sky over occupied France was a battlefield of smoke and fire. The sun was blotted out by black flak bursts, tracer rounds stitched the air, and the roar of engines drowned out every other sound. Inside the open waste hatch of a B-17 Flying Fortress, Staff Sergeant Tom Harris, just 22 years old, braced himself against the icy wind at 20,000 feet. His gloved hands gripped the twin handles of his .50 caliber Browning machine gun, knuckles white, breath fogging in the freezing air. Suddenly, a blinding flash, then chaos. A direct hit from German flak tore through the fuselage, ripping metal and flesh, filling the bomb with smoke and shrapnel. The world exploded in noise and pain. Harris felt the floor vanish beneath him. He was weightless, tumbling head over heels, the wind screaming in his ears. The B-17 spun away above him, a burning comet in the sky. He was falling 4 miles above enemy territory, with no parachute, nothing but the gun still clutched in his hands. Below, the patchwork fields of France spun wildly, growing closer with every second. Above, German fighters circled like vultures, their engines snarling, their guns searching for another kill. Harris's mind raced, memories of home, of his crew, of every moment that had led him to this impossible drop. The cold bit into his skin, the air tore at his lungs, but he refused to let go of the gun, the only thing between him and the enemy. The stakes were life and death, and the outcome was anything but certain. In that endless fall, with the ground rushing up and the sky full of enemies, Tom Harris's story was just beginning. The world held its breath, waiting to see if a gunner could survive the impossible understand the impossible odds Tom Harris faced. You have to step back into the skies over Europe in the summer of 1944, a world where every mission was a roll of the dice, and every man who climbed into a B-17 knew he might not return. The air war was relentless. By July, the Allies were deep into their strategic bombing campaign, sending hundreds of flying fortresses across the Channel each day to hammer German industry, railways, and cities. The goal was simple: break the enemy's will to fight. The cost was staggering. The B-17 Flying Fortress was a marvel of American engineering, a 4-engine behemoth bristling with up to 13.50 caliber machine guns. Its thick skin and self-sealing fuel tanks gave it a reputation for toughness, but it was far from invincible. Flak, anti-aircraft shells that burst in midair could shred a bomber in seconds. German fighter pilots, flying nimble Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, attacked in coordinated waves, diving through the formations with cannons blazing. The B-17's armor could stop a bullet, but not a direct hit from flak or a 20mm shell. Inside the fortress, every man had a job. The waste gunners, like Harris, stood at open windows, exposed to the freezing slipstream, scanning the sky for enemy fighters. Their twin .50s could spit out hundreds of rounds a minute, but aiming was a matter of instinct and nerves. The intercom crackled with shouted warnings, the air filled with the smell of gunpowder and sweat. The bombers flew in tight formations, overlapping their field of fire, but even the best gunners couldn't cover every angle. The Germans knew this, and they exploited every weakness. The psychological toll was immense. Crews lived with the knowledge that one lucky burst of flak, one unseen fighter, could end everything in a heartbeat. The casualty rates were brutal. By 1944, the odds of completing a 25-mission tour were slim. Men coped in different ways. Some joked, some prayed, some wrote letters home they never expected to send. But all of them relied on each other. In the air, the crew was a brotherhood, bound by fear, duty, and the hope that skill and luck would see them through. For Harris, the waist gunner's position was both a privilege and a curse. He was the youngest on the crew, the kid, but he carried the same weight as the rest. His .50 caliber Brownings were his lifeline, the only thing standing between his friends and the enemy. He knew the specs by heart: 850 rounds per minute, armor-piercing incendiary rounds, effective range of 1,000 yards. But numbers meant little when the sky erupted in fire. The air war over Europe was a deadly gauntlet, a test of courage and endurance. Every mission was a story of survival, of men pushed to their limits by forces they could barely comprehend. Against this backdrop, Tom Harris's ordeal was about to begin, a story not just of one man's fall, but the brotherhood, bravery, and cheer that defined the crews of the Flying Fortress. Tom Harris's story began far from the chaos of war, in the endless wheat fields and dusty backroads of rural Kansas. Born in 1922, he was the youngest of three, the one who always listened more than he spoke. His father, a World War I veteran and a farmer, taught Tom to respect hard work and the land. By the time he was 12, Tom could fix a tractor with baling wire and a wrench, and he could hit a jackrabbit at 100 yards with his father's old Winchester. The prairie taught him patience. The farm taught him grit, and the hunt taught him the value of a steady hand. When war came, Tom enlisted with a sense of duty and a quiet hope that his skills would matter. Basic training was a blur of mud, sweat, and shouted orders, but Tom's marksmanship stood out. He was assigned to the Army Air Forces, trained as a waist-gunner on the B-17 Flying Fortress. The .50 caliber Browning became his new tool, heavy, powerful, and unforgiving. He learned to strip and clean it blindfolded, to feel the difference between a smooth feed and a jam, to trust a weapon as he trusted his own hands. The crew of the B-17 was a brotherhood forged in fear and laughter. Tom was the kid, the youngest by 2 years, but he earned his place with quiet competence. He wrote letters home, folded and refolded in his pocket, and read the ones his mother sent, full of news from the farm and prayers for his safety. In the evenings, he'd sit by the open hatch, cleaning his gun while the others played cards or swapped stories about girls and home. He took pride in his role, knowing that every round he fired might save a friend's life. But beneath the camaraderie, Tom felt the weight of expectation. He wanted to prove himself, not just to the crew, but to himself. Every mission was a test, every takeoff a question mark. He watched the older gunners, learned their tricks, and listened to their warnings about flak and fighters. As the missions grew deadlier and the losses mounted, Tom's resolve hardened. He was no longer just a kid from Kansas. He was a gunner on a Flying Fortress, and he was ready to face whatever the war would throw at him. At 4:30 a.m. on July 19th, 1944, the airfield at Bassingbourn was already alive with the low rumble of engines and the sharp scent of aviation fuel. The sky was a deep, pre-dawn blue, the kind that made every shadow seem longer, every sound more urgent. Inside the briefing room, Tom Harris and his crew sat shoulder to shoulder, the tension so thick it felt like a physical weight. The operations officer pointed to the map, tracing a red line from England across the Channel, deep into the heart of occupied France. The target, a railway junction near St. Lo, critical to the German supply lines, resisting the Allied breakout from Normandy. The room was filled with the scratch of pencils on notepads, the rustle of flight jackets, and the nervous coughs of men who'd flown too many missions to pretend they weren't afraid. The weather officer warned of scattered clouds and heavy flak over the target. The intelligence officer listed the enemy fighter groups expected to intercept. The final words were always the same: "Good luck, gentlemen. Not all of you will be coming back." Outside, the B-17 Flying Fortress gleamed under floodlights, its olive-drab skin patched and scarred from previous missions. Harris ran his hand along the cold metal, feeling the rivets beneath his fingers. He checked his .50 caliber Brownings, oiled and loaded, the barrels gleaming in the half-light. The bomb load, 12 500-pounders, was cradled in the bay, each one a promise and a threat. The crew moved through their rituals, the pilot and co-pilot running through checklists, the navigator plotting courses, the radio operator tuning frequencies, the gunners checking ammunition belts and oxygen masks. The banner was forced, but necessary. "Don't forget your lucky rabbit's foot, Tom," the tail gunner joked, slapping Harris on the back. "Just keep those fighters off my tail, and I'll buy you a drink in London." Harris shot back, grinning despite the knot in his stomach. Each man carried his own talisman, a letter from home, a St. Christopher medal, a faded photograph tucked into a pocket. Engines roared to life. For right are 1820 Cyclones shaking the ground as the fortress taxied into position. The intercom crackled with voices. Ready in the waist, bomb bay doors closed, all set up front. The takeoff was a controlled chaos, the heavy bomber lumbering down the runway before lifting into the gray dawn. Harris felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as the ground fell away, the world shrinking to the cramped, noisy, freezing space inside the B-17. The formation assembled over the coast, dozens of bombers wingtip to wingtip, their silver bellies catching the first light of day. The English Channel slid beneath them, a ribbon of steel-blue water. Harris checked his guns again, eyes scanning the horizon for the first sign of enemy fighters. The radio crackled with coded messages. The navigator called out headings, and the pilot's voice was calm and steady. As they crossed into enemy airspace, the tension ratcheted higher. Every man knew the odds. Every man knew the price. Harris gripped his guns, heart pounding, breath fogging in the cold. The mission had begun, and there was no turning back. At 11:23 a.m., the sky over France erupted. The first warning came as a crackle on the intercom. Bandits, 3 o'clock high, followed by the distant glint of sunlight on wings. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, the Luftwaffe's finest, dove out of the sun, their engines howling, guns already spitting fire. The formation of B-17s tightened, gunners swinging their .50 caliber Brownings to track the incoming fighters. Tom Harris felt his heart leap into his throat as he gripped the handles of his waist gun. The vibration of the engines and the cold wind through the open hatch a constant reminder of how exposed he was. The first pass was a blur. Tracers stitched the air, orange and white lines arcing past the windows. The B-17 shuddered as flak bursts erupted all around, black puffs of smoke and shrapnel hammering the fuselage. Harris squeezed the triggers. The twin Brownings roared into life, the barrels jerking in his hands. The smell of cordite filled the air, mingling with sweat and fear. He saw a Messerschmitt flash past, so close he could see the pilot's goggles, then bank away trailing smoke. The intercom was a chorus of chaos. Tail, tail, he's on us. Left waist, incoming. Bomb bay hit. The fortress rocked as a shell exploded beneath the wing, sending Harris sprawling against the bulkhead. He scrambled back to his gun, ears ringing, vision blurred. The radio operator was shouting for help, the navigator cursing as maps scattered in the wind. The pilot's voice cut through the noise, calm but strained. Hold your positions. Keep firing. We're almost to the target. Another wave of fighters dove in, cannons blazing. The B-17 took a hit near the nose, glass shattering, blood and metal spraying the cockpit. Harris fired in short, desperate bursts, tracking a Focke-Wulf as it rolled and climbed away. The fortress was bleeding, hydraulic fluid, oil, and smoke pouring from a dozen wounds. The right waist gun jammed. Harris cursed, yanked the charging handle, and cleared the round just as another fighter screamed past. Suddenly, a flak burst tore through the fuselage just behind Harris. The world exploded in noise and pain. He was thrown off his feet, the floor vanishing beneath him. For a split second, he saw the inside of the bomber, his crew, his friends, frozen in a tableau of terror. Then the wind grabbed him, yanking him out into the freezing sky. He tumbled head over heels, the earth spinning below, the B-17 a burning comet above him. The cold was absolute, a knife that cut through his flight suit and gloves. His lungs burned, his ears roared, and his mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Home, the farm, the faces of his crew. But even as he fell, Harris clung to his machine gun, the only thing left between him and the enemy. As he plummeted, he saw German fighters circling, some firing at the falling B-17, others banking toward him. Instinct took over. Harris braced the gun against his body, squeezed the triggers, and fired wild bursts at the enemy planes. The recoil jolted him, the tracers arcing through the sky, forcing a Focke-Wulf to break off its attack. For a moment, Harris was not a victim but a gunner, still fighting, still defiant, even as gravity dragged him toward the earth. The ground rushed up, a patchwork of fields and forests growing larger with every heartbeat. Harris's mind flickered with memories. His father's voice, the smell of Kansas wheat, the laughter of his crew. He thought of the men still fighting above, the fortress still burning, the mission unfinished. The cold numbed his body, but his will refused to surrender. As the last of his ammunition ran dry, Harris closed his eyes, the wind screaming in his ears. He had done everything he could. The outcome was out of his hands. In that endless fall, with the world spinning and the sky full of enemies, Tom Harris's story was not ending. It was about to become legend. The world was nothing but wind and sky. At 10:44 a.m. on July 19th, 1944, Tom Harris tumbled to the thin, freezing air from miles above the fields of France. The roar of the B-17's engines was gone, replaced by the shriek of the slipstream tearing at his flight suit, the numbing cold biting through every layer of wool and leather. The earth spun below him, a dizzying patchwork of green and brown, growing larger with every heartbeat. For a moment, Harris couldn't breathe. The shock of the fall, the sudden silence after the chaos, left him suspended between terror and disbelief. His mind raced, flashes of childhood, the smell of Kansas wheat, his mother's voice calling him in for supper, the laughter of his crew in the barracks. He thought of the men still fighting above, the fortress burning, the mission unfinished. He thought of the letter in his pocket, the one he'd never sent. The wind tore his limbs, spinning him end over end. He tried to orient himself, to find up and down, but the sky and earth blurred together. His hands, numb and stiff, still gripped the handles of his .50 caliber Browning. The gun was heavy, awkward, but it was all he had, his last connection to the world he'd just left behind. As he fell, Harris saw the German fighters circling above. Some were still firing at the crippled B-17, others banking toward him, curious or perhaps eager for an easy kill. Instinct took over. Harris braced the gun against his body, squeezed the triggers, and fired wild bursts at the enemy planes. The recoil jolted him, the tracers arcing through the sky, forcing a Focke-Wulf to break off its attack. For a moment, Harris was not a victim but a gunner, still fighting, still defiant, even as gravity dragged him toward the earth. The cold was absolute. At 20,000 feet, the temperature hovered near minus 30 degrees. Harris's breath crystallized on his mask. His fingers stiffened around the gun. He felt the blood draining from his face, the air thinning, his vision narrowing to a tunnel of blue and white. He tried to count the seconds, to remember his training, terminal velocity, 120 miles per hour, maybe a minute before impact, but time lost all meaning. The only reality was the wind, the cold, and the desperate will to survive. His thoughts flickered between hope and despair. He prayed, half-remembered words, a plea for mercy, a promise to do better if given another chance. He remembered the stories of men who had survived impossible falls, the rumors passed around the barracks. He wondered if he would be one of them, or just another name on a casualty list. The ground rushed up faster and faster. Harris saw the tops of trees, the glint of a river, the distant shapes of farmhouses. He tried to brace himself, to prepare for the impact, but his body was beyond control. The last thing he saw was a flash of sunlight on water, the world spinning into darkness. As he blacked out, Harris's final thought was not of fear, but defiance. He had fought to the last, refused to surrender, and met the enemy on his own terms. In that endless fall, with the sky full of enemies and the ground rushing up to meet him, Tom Harris's story was not ending. It was about to become legend. The world returned in fragments, light, pain, the distant sound of voices. Tom Harris awoke face down in the field, the taste of earth and blood in his mouth, his body a patchwork of bruises and agony. For a long moment, he lay still, unable to believe he was alive. The last thing he remembered was the sky spinning, the ground rushing up, and the certainty that he would never see another sunrise. But now, the sun was warm on his back, the air thick with the scent of grass and wildflowers. He tried to move, every muscle protesting, but found that nothing was broken, at least nothing that wouldn't heal. He rolled onto his side, blinking against the glare, and saw the shattered remains of his .50 caliber gun a few feet away, half buried in the soft earth. Around him, the field was littered with broken branches and torn up sod, the aftermath of his impossible fall. Later, he would learn how he had survived. The trees had broken his descent, their branches slowing his fall just enough. The ground, softened by recent rain, had cushioned the final impact. Some would call it luck, others a miracle. Harris could only marvel at the odds. A man falling for miles without a parachute, walking away battered but breathing. He struggled to his feet, every joint screaming, and staggered toward the edge of the field. In the distance, he saw a cluster of farmhouses, smoke curling from chimneys. He took a step, then another, until the world tilted and he collapsed again. When he opened his eyes, a group of French villagers stood over him, their faces a mix of fear and awe. One of them, a woman in a faded blue dress, knelt beside him, pressing a canteen to his lips. The water was cold and sweet, and Harris drank greedily. The villagers spoke in rapid French, their words a blur, but Harris understood enough. They had seen the B-17 fall, watched the dogfight in the sky, and now stared at the American gunner who had fallen from clouds. News spread quickly. Within hours, word of the gunner who fell from the sky reached both Allied and German lines. Some called it a miracle, others a trick, but all agreed it was impossible. Harris knew he couldn't stay long. German patrols would be searching for survivors, and the risk to the villagers was too great. With their help, he was hidden in a barn, then smuggled from house to house, always moving under cover of darkness. The French resistance, men and women who risked everything for freedom, gave him food, clothes, and a battered bicycle. He learned to trust their whispered instructions, to hide at the sound of engines, to keep moving no matter how much it hurt. Each day was a test of endurance and will. Harris's body ached, his wounds slow to heal, but his spirit was buoyed by the kindness of strangers and the knowledge that he had cheated death. He thought of his crew, wondered who had survived, and promised himself he would make it back to Allied lines, no matter the cost. As he moved through the countryside, Harris's legend grew. Children whispered about the American who had fallen from the sky. Resistance fighters marveled at his story, passing it along with every coded message. Even the Germans, hearing rumors of a gunner who had survived the impossible, redoubled their patrols, searching for a ghost. For Harris, the miracle was not just survival. It was a chance to fight again, to honor the men he had lost, and to prove that even in the darkest moments, hope could still be found. The journey was far from over, but for the first time since the fall, Tom Harris believed he might live to see home again. The days after Tom Harris's miraculous survival were a blur of pain, fear, and determination. He awoke each morning in a different barn or cellar, the air thick with the scent of hay, with smoke, and the ever-present threat of discovery. The French resistance moved him like a secret, passing him from one safe house to the next, always under cover of darkness. Each new face was a risk, each whispered word a lifeline. Harris learned to trust the code phrases, the knock patterns, the hurried gestures that meant hide now or move fast. His body ached from the fall, bruised ribs, a twisted ankle, cuts and scrapes that throbbed with every step. But his spirit was unbroken. He refused to let the pain slow him down. The resistance provided what they could: a battered bicycle, a stolen German greatcoat, a forged identity card with a name he could barely pronounce. Harris studied the map they gave him, memorizing the network of back roads and forest trails that snaked toward the Allied lines. Travel was a constant test of nerves. German patrols prowled the countryside, their boots echoing on cobblestones, their dogs sniffing for the scent of fear. Harris learned to move at dawn and dusk, to hide in ditches when convoys passed, to keep his head down at checkpoints. He ate when he could, stale bread, hard cheese, apples filched from orchards, and slept in short, restless bursts, always listening for the sound of engines or the bark of command in German. The resistance fighters were his teachers and his guardians. They showed him how to blend in, how to answer questions without giving away his accent, how to disappear into a crowd. He watched as they risked everything to help him, young men and women who had lost family to the war, old farmers who remembered the last German occupation, children who carried messages in their shoes. Their courage humbled him, and their hope became his own. Every mile brought new dangers. Once, a patrol stopped him on a country road, their eyes lingering on his boots, his too short haircut. Harris forced himself to smile, to mumble a greeting in broken French, to keep moving as his heart hammered in his chest. Another time, he hid for hours in a hayloft as soldiers searched the far below, their voices drifting up through the cracks in floorboards. But Harris never lost sight of his goal. He was driven by loyalty to his crew, to the mission, to the promise he'd made to himself as he fell from the sky. He would not let the war end for him in a French field, not while his friends were still fighting. Each step was a victory. Each day survived a testament to the will to return. At last, after weeks of evasion, Harris reached the Allied lines. Exhausted, gaunt, and nearly unrecognizable, he stumbled into a forward outpost, clutching the battered dog tags that proved who he was. The soldiers who found him stared in disbelief, then cheered. The legend of the gunner who fell from the sky had come full circle. Tom Harris was home, and the fight was not yet over. When Tom Harris finally crossed back into Allied lines, the world seemed to move in slow motion. The first faces he saw were a mix of disbelief and awe. Soldiers staring at the gaunt, mud-streaked gunner who claimed to have fallen from the sky. Word spread quickly through the outpost, then the regiment, then the entire air base. The legend of the B-17 gunner who survived the impossible was born before Harris even had a chance to catch his breath. His crew, those who had survived the mission, could hardly believe it. The reunion was raw and emotional, hugs, tears, and the kind of laughter that only comes after staring death in the face. The pilot, still limping from his own wounds, gripped Harris's shoulder and whispered, "I thought we'd lost you, kid." The waist gunner who'd shared so many missions with him just shook his head, unable to find words. For a moment, the war faded, replaced by the simple miracle of survival. Recognition came swiftly. Commanders called Harris in for debriefings, wanting every detail of his fall, his fight, and his escape. Medals were mentioned, citations drafted, but Harris felt the weight of every handshake. He knew the cost of his survival, the empty bunks in the barracks, the names missing from the morning roll call. The B-17, once a symbol of American might, now carried a new legend. The gunner who defied death, not just for himself, but for the memory of those who hadn't made it home. Harris's story spread through the Air Force, inspiring awe and hope in equal measure. Pilots and gunners whispered about the man who had fired his .50s while falling, who had refused to give up even as the ground rushed up to meet him. For Harris, the recognition was bittersweet. He carried the burden of survival, the memories of friends lost, and the knowledge that every medal was paid for in blood. In quiet moments, Harris reflected on what it meant to be a hero. He had never sought glory, only to do his job, to protect his crew, to make it home. The war would go on, and so would the stories. But for one gunner, one impossible fall, and one battered B-17, the legend would live on, a testament to courage, luck, and the unbreakable will to survive. As we close a chapter on Tom Harris's impossible survival, take a moment to reflect on the courage, ingenuity, and sheer willpower that define not just one man, but an entire generation. If you or someone in your family has a story of service, survival, or heroism, whether in the skies, on the ground, or at sea, we invite you to share it in the comments below. Your memories and insights help keep these legacies alive, connecting generations and honoring those who stood their ground when it mattered most. If this story moved you, please like the video and subscribe to our channel for more true account of forgotten heroes, battlefield innovation, and the untold moments that change history. Every like, comment, and share helps us reach more people and preserve these stories for future generations. Don't let these lessons fade into silence. Be part of a community that values courage, ingenuity, and remembrance. And if you think you've heard it all, stay tuned. Our next episode uncovers another hidden chapter of World War II, a story so unexpected. It will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the war. Don't miss it.